Welcome to Module 4, and we're studying the discipline of the public health discipline of biomedical sciences this week. I've labeled this lecture The Present and the Future because I truly believe that biomedical sciences and the advancements in that area, in the area of, molecular biology, in the area of genetics, that this is going to more personalize medicine and help us, the public health people, have more ammunition for helping people to better health outcomes. So we've studied so far, we've studied what public health is. We've studied epidemiology and its role in driving public health, the research that they do, the observational studies that they do, really the problem solving role that they do. We've also looked at the statistics end of it, how statistics helps us make sense out of the uncertainty that is, the sciences and public health. So let's get started with our review of the biomedical sciences. So what is biomedical sciences? It's the combines the study of human physiology, human pathology, and pharmacology. Biomedical sciences might work in different fields, including immunology, cell or molecular biology, toxology, or genetics. And some of them might just do straight research. So throughout this lecture, we're going to look at, in the context of biomedical sciences, we're going to look at chronic and infectious disease, how they're managed and controlled. We're going to look at preborn and infant testings, and finally, and this is more thorough in the module. You have access to several different videos that will look at the ever-increasing importance of DNA and gene study, genetics, and how that will help us make medicine more personal. So infectious diseases that were more major killers in the past, you can read them here: smallpox, cholera, which you did the review of John Snow's work on that. Measles, diphtheria, and influenza were all ones that were challenges in the past and major killers. We have done a great job of managing those where they are not as much of a problem anymore. So again, infectious disease that we thought that we had conquered, how did we do that? First was through immunizations, right? Very important. Second was through antibiotics, and we'll talk a little bit when we talk about the resurgence of infectious disease, how antibiotics and their called misuse, but just their use has caused some resistance, if you will. Other public health measures that we've taken, purification of water, proper disposal of sewage, pasteurization of milk, and improved nutrition and personal hygiene. So let's look at infectious disease and the infectious agents that cause those things. So we have bacteria, we have viruses, and we have parasites. And you can read through the list there yourselves, but these are the three things that will cause infectious disease. Now, what's the difference between those? So bacteria versus viruses and parasites. A bacteria is a free-living cell that can live inside or outside of a body. So like with the current COVID-19, and I guess I should finish that sentence, while viruses and parasites are non-living collections, and they have to have a host in order to survive. So with COVID-19, that particular virus or parasites cannot survive without having a host, like a human being or an animal, to survive. It cannot survive outside of the host for any long period of time. Where a bacteria will live for pretty long outside of a host. Bacteria and parasites can often be killed with antibiotics, but these medicines, the antibiotics, do not kill viruses. Means of transmission for viruses and or bacteria directly from one person to another, and I put here droplets. Something you'll hear again about the COVID, whether it's a droplet or an aerosol. Also via aerosols. Now, what's the difference between a droplet and an aerosol? A droplet's a heavier product. It's like spit that comes out of our mouth. An aerosol is lighter. It will stay suspended in the air for longer, could be for hours. Think about smoke from that comes out that just kind of floats in the air, if you will. Touching contaminated object and then touching your face and your nose and your eyes. Contaminated water or food can be a transmitter. If you get some sort of bacteria or, for example, salmonella in some chicken or something, it can be transmitted via that food. Also vectors, and vectors, the best example of that is mosquito that can transmit malaria or those sort of things by just like a mosquito does, will bite you. And then the last of transmission is sexual contact. So that can cause a transmission of things like AIDS and other HPVs that, I'm sorry, not HPVs, but transmittable diseases that are sexually related. Now, with infectious disease and how we manage infectious disease, the idea of a chain of infection is a key concept that we want you to understand. So let's look at that real quick. The transmission pattern is composed of links, and we'll show you some pictures of this here in the coming slides. But the pathogen is the infection agent, so the virus that's associated with COVID is an infectious agent. You need to have a reservoir, right? So a virus needs to have a place where it can live, and that's the reservoir. So it might be a human, it might be an animal. It seems as though with COVID, you also need a means of transmission. So that might be those things that we just talked about, which is going to be another human, through aerosols, through touching your face after you've touched something else. So that all might be a means of transmission. Are possible. You also need a susceptible host, and I think the word susceptible here is important because in order for that person to be infected and their immune system to not fight it off, they have to be susceptible, right? They if they're 1,000% healthy, then most likely the immune system is going to fight off that virus. So the public health measures to control the spread of disease are aimed at interrupting this chain of infection, which I've shared already. And also, whatever the links are to the most vulnerable. So here is a graphic of the chain of infection. So you can see there again the reservoir, right, which could be a human, it could be an animal, it could be, water. In the modes of transmission we've talked about, and I just want to, for chance of repetition, to make sure we understand this, I want to keep repeating these things. So, by droplets, by airborne, by food, by vector, by direct contact, all those things, and then it needs to go to an infectable host, right, or susceptible host. So we want to look at interrupting the chain of infection, and that's what public health officials are trying to do to try to lessen the impact of a particular virus. So I like this particular picture because it shows the different links, infectious agent, reservoir. It adds here a portal of exit. Right? Not super important here. A mode of transmission, a portal of entry, and a susceptible host. So what public health people are going to do, and what epidemiologists and those people that are working to limit the disease, they're going to look for some place along this chain to break that chain of infection. So how might we do that? How might we interrupt that chain of infection? The first we might do is we might kill the pathogen with antibiotics, right? So if it's not a virus, if it's a pathogen, so COVID's not a great example here, but we kill the pathogen with antibiotics. The second thing we could do is eliminate the reservoir, right? So if the reservoir is, for example, is food, right? So it's a foodborne illness, we might eliminate the food that is causing the illness. In order to prevent transmission, we might also insert like hand washing, quarantine. For sexually transmitted diseases, condoms is something that we might use to prevent transmission. And also through immunization, we might increase the resistance of the host. So public health measures that we do to manage transmission, and you've seen this, in the COVID, at least I've seen it, especially amongst our schools and in government. So epidemiological surveillance, right? So we are reporting every case of COVID-19, we are tracking that. You can get it very easily. We're doing contact tracing at our school, and what I mean by that is I'll get an email from our school that says that someone at school got COVID. Your child might be at risk. So we do contact tracing, another method. Immunization. We're like full on with the vaccines at this point. It's a miracle, and I say that sincerely, that we were able to develop something that quickly, and just says a lot about our medical profession and that group that created that so quickly. And then quarantine if necessary. Again, at least here in California, if you get COVID, it's recommended that you quarantine for 10 days. And the 10 days is developed and has evolved, because it used to be 14 days, as they understand how the virus spreads and how long that it lasts. So again, this is stuff that I just reviewed with you just now, so I will go past that since I've already done that. But again, just epidemiological surveillance, contact tracing, quarantine, and vaccines. So eradication is possible if there's no non-human reservoir, if a vaccine exists. The verdict's out on COVID, whether we'll be able to eradicate it or whether it's just going to be like other influenzas, where we continue to get seasonal variants of it, and we just have to deal with it each year. You can see here, smallpox was eradicated in 1977. Polio still exists, but was eradicated in the Western Hemisphere, and then also in the U.S., measles is no longer an endemic in the United States. So vaccines is very important in controlling the spread, right, of various infectious diseases. A lot of people, and I have some friends that are not fully supportive of vaccinations. There's been talk of it causing autism. I'll let everybody do their own research on that, whether that's true or not. Side effects do exist, and it's not without risk getting a vaccine. Some parents have refused to accept the risks, and I think those numbers are fewer than maybe what that statement leads on, but there are some that will resist. Herd immunity is lost if many people do not get vaccinated. The additional variants that come along if people don't get vaccinated, they're usually weaker and don't advance as fast. But if you're looking for herd immunity, it's probably a good idea for as many people to get vaccinated. Pharmaceutical companies are reluctant to develop vaccines. Low profits and risk of lawsuits, even though they do have a lot of protections when they create those that say that they can't be sued. So discussion question this week on infectious diseases, and actually also on chronic diseases, is going to be, I want you to choose an infectious disease and analyze its spread and use the chain of infection. And how can the chain of infection be interrupted? Just give me some examples. And I'm asking you to do the same for chronic disease. Now, that may not sound like it, but I want you to put your thinking cap on and think about how you can interrupt the chain of chronic disease, even though it's further out, and we'll take a look at that in a second. It's more, what happens now, changing the chain of infection, is going to impact something way down the road. But I want you to put your thinking caps on and apply the same chain of infection stop to chronic disease. So that will be in your modules this week as your question of the week that will be part of your written discussion. Here's something I just want you to contemplate. I want you to go to the CDC website on vaccines and immunizations. Just look at what you can find about the safety, the validity, or the safety of childhood vaccines. Do you believe that the benefits outweigh the risks of vaccination? So just contemplate that. You don't have to create anything formal, but just something to look at. So we talked about the diseases, the infectious diseases that we have eradicated, and are still not dealing with on as big a term, but what has been the emerging viruses? You have Ebola, monkeypox, Zika, and one that is most forward in our minds is the the SARS, the COVID-19, right? Something that's impacted all of our lives over the last year and a half. So factors that lead to the emergence of new infectious diseases, I'll go to the center here first, international travel. I mean, the more global our country becomes, the more there is chance, the more interaction. It just makes sense that there's an increased risk of spreading and bringing disease from, other states, other countries, etc. Breakdown of social restraints on sexual behavior and intravenous drug use. Certainly human activities that bring us into close contact with wildlife, and modern agricultural practices also could have an impact on infectious disease, in that they may use antibiotics with their cattle. They may use certain chemicals on their crops that bring resistance to certain diseases down. So influenza, and again, this is just real quick understanding of how viruses might work. But influenza is an RNA virus like HIV and SARS-CoV-19, and really SARS-CoV-19 is like other SARS, respiratory diseases that have circulated, in that it's constantly mutating, right? You've seen the news recently about the different variants that have come out after the virus first started. Vaccines in this particular instance, like the influenza vaccine, each year our scientists need to adjust the vaccine to make it more effective against the different mutating strains. And new lethal strains appear periodically, and that's what happened with COVID-19. New bacterial threats. You can read those first four. The one that we'll talk a little bit about is antibiotic resistance. There's been a couple causes of the antibiotic resistance. Some of it has been, like we talked about before, through agriculture. Another thing is, misuse in medical, and I'm careful to not call it completely misuse in medical, in the sense that, I was given, as a kid for acne, I was given, tetracycline, which is an antibiotic, right? That probably caused a greater resistance in me because I took it, and it, made my immune system more resistant to antibiotics in the future. So anyway, that's something that we're grappling with, and what the next couple decades holds about the effectiveness of antibiotics. Tuberculosis, leading cause of infectious diseases worldwide, and there's a resurgence in the U.S. in the early 90s. People with HIV are much higher at risk. It's transmitted via aerosol, which makes it even more invisible and hard to detect. If left untreated, tuberculosis can be fatal in 50% of the cases. So now I want to shift our emphasis to the biomedical basis of chronic disease. Compared to infectious diseases, chronic disease is a much bigger challenge in identifying causes. And why is that the case? Let's start with, it's a leading cause of death and disability, so it's something we absolutely have to address with urgency. But we often don't address it with any urgency, either personally or as a medical community, because it's not deadly in the short run, right? It's not like COVID and those sort of things where it could be deadly in the short term. It's might not have an impact for decades to come. And we'll talk a little bit about, not a little bit about, but when we talk about the social and behavioral impacts on this, people that, something's not going to have an immediate impact on them, it's tough to get them to change. So that's why, again, our role in managing chronic disease and helping people change is going to be a bigger challenge than with the infectious disease. there's usually multiple risk factors that are less recognizable. Now, I say this, but we're becoming more and more knowledgeable about what things impact. Like, for example, cancer. We understand through tons of research that, and there's a video for you in your module here that I created that talks about how uh, consuming fruits and vegetables, through numerous studies, lessens your risk of cancer and heart disease. So, we do know that there are multiple causes, but we do know there are behavior changes that we can do to manage that. We talked a little bit about the long period of onset, uh, you know, possibility of secondary prevention. This is something that's good. I mean, I have, uh, you know, uh, a small issue with blood pressure, so I take a small dose of blood pressure medication. That's a secondary prevention method that will allow me to uh, hopefully avoid heart disease and or cancer. The importance of animal models and ethical concerns limiting experience on humans. Uh, those are things that you know we can study animals and make the DNA in uh, uh, a chimpanzee or a rat is something like 80 and 75% similar to humans. So we can gain some information from doing animal studies, and again, doing them in a way that is not harmful to the animals. And then ethical concerns with limiting experiments on humans. I mean, you don't want to put what you think is a great intervention and have a randomized control study and then give the intervention to some and then leave others without the intervention. That's a good example. That is the Tuskegee study that was done where they withheld treatment from uh, a certain population in the study of syphilis, and the intention was to find out what the impact of no treatment was for syphilis. So there are some ethical concerns with any sort of experiments on humans. So let's look at a couple of the different major killers of, at least in the United States, by chronic disease. Cardiovascular disease, you know, heart disease and stroke are the two leading causes of death in the U.S. Uh, the causes have been fairly well established. The standard American diet, which I love this acronym, is SAD diet. Um, not that I don't participate in it sometimes, but we try to manage that. Um, diet, high blood pressure, diabetes, smoking, interacting, causing the arteries to get clogged. So again, we will talk more in the behavioral section, which I believe is module 6, about how we can help people move through and make changes that make them less susceptible to cardiovascular disease. High blood pressure, you can look through those quickly. I won't spend a lot of time there. Cancer. Now, this one's a little bit more difficult than heart disease in that it's not as visible, right? We can't necessarily see the cancer as it's developing because it's so microscopic. Um, again, there are, and I'll go to the top far right box here. It says, diet and hormones play a role. What we do understand about cancer is that, our lifestyles do impact the expression of cancer. So again, certain lifestyle changes. Again, this is what we do now to what we do down the road, and I understand that that's very difficult. But the study of epigenetics shows that, again, that we can keep cancer from expressing itself, even if we have a propensity towards cancer, by certain lifestyle changes. Diabetes, again, problem with the SAD diet. Prevalence of obesity, which related often, diabetes and obesity. And those are things that are not getting better in the United States. So diabetes is a huge problem, causes just some very bad disabilities, and even as diabetes is progressing, I mean, it causes a quality of life that is not great, and then that as it gets more advanced, can involve like removing limbs, etc. So Diabetes is something that thankfully, again, the evidence is that it can be reversed if you make certain lifestyle changes. You can reverse that and move yourself to better health. Again, complications of diabetes, awful stuff: blindness, kidney failure, poor wound healing, and amputations. Other chronic diseases of public health importance: Alzheimer's disease. As our population gets older, and even younger people are getting dementia, Alzheimer's disease, and the study of this is going to be important because, again, if you look at the statistics are growing of people that are passing away from Alzheimer's and younger people that are passing away from Alzheimer's, and it's also understood that that's something that starts in the 40s and it expresses itself like 20 years later. So anything we can do early on to help people manage that, we're going to help them further on down the road. Arthritis and mental illness are also, some chronic diseases that we want to make sure that we're paying attention to. So here's what I want you to contemplate. Again, there's no formal assignment here, but this is just me trying to stimulate your brain. Is how do epidemiology and biomedical sciences complement each other in improving people's understanding of chronic disease? So think about that one and answer that in your head. And if you want to jot it down, that's great too. Something else that I want you to contemplate is, compare the medical approach of public health, or the medical approach with the public health approach to saving lives from cardiovascular disease. So, I'll give you one example. And what are the advantages and disadvantages of each? Medical profession, approach to saving lives from cardiovascular disease might involve a stent in your heart, right when it's already blocked. Public health might say, listen, before you get to that point, let's talk about your diet and try to keep the arteries from getting blocked in the first place. So, or it might suggest that it wasn't necessarily the blockage in the arteries that caused the heart attack. It was the smoking and the foods that we ate that caused the heart attack. So those are just a couple thoughts on that particular item. So the last thing we want to look at is kind of the genetics around public health and looking at some of the tests that we might do to help us anticipate injury so we can deal with stuff, anticipate disease and health conditions, so we might be able to get to those earlier, because always earlier is better. Right? So you might have genetic disease, you might have a chromosomal abnormality like Down syndrome. And I want to share with you a story about my college roommate. So my college roommate has 3 kids. His third kid has Down syndrome. He named his son Cash, right? They knew before, because of the test, that they were having Down syndrome baby. They chose to have the baby. He named his son Cash because he wanted him to know that he had value. So anyway, that's just a quick story that I wanted to share with you. So just so someone has Down syndrome does not mean that they have no value. You're going to see a lot of in fact, I think your book says that if someone has Down syndrome, the only treatment might be abortion, which it just breaks my heart to think that. The genetics, and we'll take a look at a couple pictures here in a second. The genetics around the Mendelian genetics theory, and this is borne out to be true, that genes come in pairs, is the understanding, and then an autosomal dominant only requires one of the 2 pairs in each parent, or 1 pair in each parent, to cause a particular disease. Autosomal recessive requires 2 of the 4 from the parents, but in auto recessive, and we'll look at this here in a second, neither of the parents has the condition, right? So they have 2 recessive genes, and unfortunately they have 2 pairs, right? One recessive, one that is active, and they give both of those to their child. And again, we'll look at something here in a second. The X-linked genetic issue is linked to the mother's X chromosome. So genetic diseases, new mutations may be caused genetic disease. Severity of some genetic conditions may be affected by the environment. If most of you may not be or have kids yet, some of you may. Certainly one of the reasons why folic acid is so important in the pregnancy term is that it reduces the risk of several genital defects. Gene influence susceptibility to adult disease, but one thing that I want to make clear here is that there are a couple different sorts of people in the world, and not to make this clear distinction, but there are people that think that have this fixed mindset that they are where they are. Their genes are going to determine their ultimate outcome. There's really nothing they can do to change their path. That is proven to not be true, right? So we need to have more of not a fixed mindset, but a growth mindset, in that there's a study called epigenetics, which talks about the expression of disease and how we can have an impact on our genes, that would cause them to not express it. And let me explain that in the simplest terms that I can think of. I may have a gene that predisposes me to cancer. If my lifestyle is a certain way, if I do certain things, I can either cause that gene to express itself or to not express itself. So those are the sort of things in public health that we want to make sure that our population understands, is that they do have control over how they're, of outcomes of health, right? At the end of the day. So these are the newborn screening things. I mean, great stuff, right? We want to try to discover stuff early. The PKU test here in the third box on the top, that all newborns are screened for. This is a test that determines whether a baby has an enzyme needed to use I can't even say the word. Use phenylalanine in his or her body. What this amino acid does is it allows for normal growth. So if that person doesn't have that gene in their body, then they may be susceptible to just like brain development, different growth things of normal growth. Most conditions are autosomal recessive, and we're going to look at an example of that here right now. So autosomal recessive genes, it's a genetic condition that can occur when the child inherits one copy of a mutated gene from each parent. So the parent in this instance doesn't have this condition, right? They may not know that they even have the recessive gene, but they can still pass it on to their kids. And we'll take a look at an example of that, a picture of that here in a second. But again, the importance of testing and understanding genetics is so important in my mind. And the more advanced we get at it, the more we're going to be able to personalize medicine and again, catch stuff earlier than we used to, and be able to better help the populations. So here's the idea of the autosomal recessive. You can see that each parent has one of the mutated genes, right? So one here on each side, the fuchsia colored or bluish colored gene there. So they have one mutated gene. So neither one of these people have the condition because they also have one normal gene, right? Genes come in pairs, right? So you can see here that they have 4 children, and they are likely to pass it on to one of the 4 children based on each of them having one recessive or one mutated gene. So this one affected son is going to have whatever condition it is that they're carrying that. So why I'm explaining this is, again, to show the importance of testing. And again, as we become more advanced, these parents could understand that they may pass this on, whatever it might be, onto one of their kids. And that may not change their decision to continue to have kids. That's a personal choice up to them, but at least they understand that there's that possibility, and they'll be able to deal with that condition from the get-go, not see it develop later on. Again, to catch it earlier and to be able to treat their son early on is of utmost importance. So the last thing that we're going to look at here is the Human Genome Project, and there's several videos that I put on your module to take a look at, and please take a look at all those, because again, this is going to be the future of medicine and public health, is personalized medicine, where we understand the intricacies of what our bodies are and how they're made up. Now, I will say this is that 99.9% of our genetic makeup is identical, right? So that's what the Human Genome Project revealed. So that's a I guess a good thing and a bad thing, in the sense that there's 0.1% that our scientists can focus on that will help us better understand what the variants are, right? Why I eat hot dogs and drink Mountain Dew and eat cheeseburgers my whole life, and I live to be 100, and somebody else eats vegetables and all the right things, and they die at age 40, right? I mean, those are things that could be helped to be understand, people that may have susceptibilities to certain things. I mean, again, maybe a certain diet works well for me, but doesn't work well for somebody else. We don't know those things now, because we haven't been able to go down to the phenomenal intricacy of the human genes, but now we have, and so we're still learning more. But so the variants are these called single nucleotide polymorphisms. That's this 0.1% that the scientists are studying. And let me give you a clear example of it already being in use. I had a family member that was recently diagnosed with breast cancer, right? So they're trying to decide treatments, what have you. She was given the gene test that was trying to discover the different markers that were, or genes that were associated with breast cancer, and what her outcomes might be, right? And so that is going to help guide the treatment that she was going to get, whether she had those recessive genes, whether she did not, and that's going to help guide treatment. Again, this to me is only great things that is going to help us best help other people. And again, here I stated the obvious. It helps us target more personal therapies and more targeted therapies. So here's what I want you to contemplate, and we discuss this a little bit, but again, no formal thing to do here, but what are the ethical issues involved in the prenatal diagnosis of each human following a genetic disease? Uh, you know, just take a look at one of these. I mean, Down syndrome. What's the are there any ethical issues in identifying those before the baby is born? So that's it for this week. We appreciate you guys listening in here, and I'm excited about what you're going to learn this week through the information presented in the modules, and how we can again best help other people.